Welcome to the Maritime Vision podcast. I'm your host, Paul Wioli. In each episode, we bring you exclusive interviews with maritime professionals, industry experts, and students. Our guests come from different backgrounds, including shipping, yachting, offshore, supply chain, and more. Our goal is to give you all the knowledge you need to succeed in the maritime industry.
Hello everyone, welcome back to a new podcast episode. And today we are with Françoise van den Brink. She's a senior advisor in energy transition for the Port of Rotterdam. It's a pleasure to having you, Françoise. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you also very much for having the possibility to tell something about our nice port of Rotterdam. My name is, as you mentioned, Françoise van den Brink, working at the Port of Rotterdam at the division, the Harbour Master division. And what we do is really, to explain it a little bit easy, is really from the shipping side looking at, what is needed with regard to everything water-based to have in place in our port. And looking at, of course, the fuels, the infrastructure, and really looking at from a governmental side, but also from an operational side. So what we have is really looking into the regulations, governmental issues, nautical aspects, but also how to have that in the operations being translated in how to work, how to do, etc., and making sure that everything that is going to happen and will happen in our port is being done in the right way. I'm responsible for the energy transition, of course, together with some colleagues. And what we are really doing is looking at what does it mean to have the alternative fuels in our port, what to take into account to make sure that if we will have the new alternative fuels in our port, that's going to be safe, and also that every aspect with regard to regulation, nautical, etc., is being covered so that we're ready.
Okay. Great testing. So you can imagine that we have so many alternatives in the industry. Sometimes we can be a little bit lost because for some companies, maybe they want to implement methanol, some want to implement hydrogen. What are the different alternatives we have in 2024?
Very good question. And I do not have the answer. What I always say is if people asking, is that if we look back, say, 5-6 years ago, we were talking about the LNG because that was the alternative fuel. And if you now see the developments, what's new, what are the alternatives? If you've seen the DNV forecast 2050 report, there is an overview of, 24 scenarios with regard to alternative fuels, all kinds of combinations as well, of course, like the bio, the E, and all kinds of combinations with those fuels. So you can imagine that it's coming from one alternative fuel 5-6 years ago, and now really facing new alternative fuels and the combination of those fuels. It's nice and challenging. Yeah. If you ask what is really ongoing at this moment, and what is also combinations, is beside the LNG, the methanol, of course, is very important at this moment, and also what is really upcoming, and also with regard to questions we see in the market, the hydrogen and the ammonia. Yeah. But of course, don't forget the rest.
Yeah, and I mean, regarding the Port of Rotterdam, do you have some, one alternative you prefer in terms of because you have more knowledge about it? Or?
It's not really talking about preference. Because every fuel has its own characteristics, and we have to look at that. And of course, there are quite some differences, and we see it as our responsibility to look into a fuel and see really what is possible, and what is the demand from the market, because also with regard to preference, there's also preference for the shipping, of course. So it's a combination of all kinds of, I would say, preferences. If you look at the fuels itself, if you look at, for example, the LNG and the hydrogen, it's mainly looking at the flammability, which is very important to look at, which is giving, I would say, challenges. But we have to make sure that we have a good look at those challenges, address them, and know how to deal with those. And if you look, for example, at the ammonia, completely other challenge. because it's a toxicity, and that is quite new, of course, if you look at fuels. So we want to be objective and really say, okay, what is now the development in the market with regard to their preference, also with regard to the newer fuels, because also all the fuels have their pros and cons, and yeah, it's really the balancing, and we are talking with the marketplace, and we're really looking into what are the fuels, also with preference, of course, from the markets, and we talk with the market parties, and we look into that and to be prepared.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's quite interesting. Maybe can you make this kind of big picture of each alternatives? I mean, the most famous one, for example, hydrogen. What are the pros and cons of this alternative? On the same with methanol, ammonia.
Well, what I already mentioned is of course the flammability compared to, for example, toxicity. Methanol, slightly different, but also the impact that if something may happen, which we do not hope, of course.
Yeah.
We also look at the really looking into what is the impact, but also to be prepared with regards to, for example, the emergency response, etc. But also from a bow tie aspect, what can be done preventive, and what kind of measures can be there. Asking about, for example, the hydrogen, the pros and cons, I'd rather give an answer in general, because if you look at a general aspect, what I said, safety aspects, that's what I mentioned already, but also, for example, the availability. If you look at the methanol, if you look at the biomethanol especially, of course, then availability is very important. Question with regard to that, but also with regard to the shipping design, also with regard to routes, for example, from the ships, they also have their preference, because hydrogen, if you look at energy density, you need some space. So all those kinds of factors are important for the decision from a ship owner, I would say, or the way you would like to use your ship with regard to, if you look at the cargo, what kind of routes, etc. Those aspects are of importance. So it's not really like pros and cons from
each difference.
Each difference you have to take into account, and then really decide from your side as a ship owner what is the best solution from all these kinds of aspects to choose from your side, and of course costs, etc. is also very important.
Yeah, it is. Let's switch to bunkering, because I think it's quite important to take into account bunkering. What are the current, I can say, infrastructure we have, for example, in the Port of Rotterdam, regarding alternative fuels and bunkering methods?
Of course, also all the alternative fuels need to be looked into for the bunkering. What we do is preparing, very general, the infrastructure is, and I would maybe say the safety framework, because the safety framework needs to be in place to make a decision if and where and how a bunkering can take place. For example, what is very important, of course, external safety, but for example also the government, so the regulation, but also the nautical aspects. If you look at the vessels in our port, they also need to be prepared that it is possible with regard to the space you have. Control zones, very important in that respect as well, but also the terminal readiness. Really looking and discussing with the terminals themselves before, for example, if you have a container vessel and it's being propelled by, for example, the hydrogen.
Yeah.
Just as an example, could also be the ammonia, doesn't matter. But for the terminal, from a container terminal, it's new because they have the experience with the containers, but now it's something completely new with regard to a fuel, and also they need to look how to be prepared with regard to that specific fuel. If you talk also about the bunkering, because it's an operation in front of that terminal.
Okay.
So terminal readiness, also mooring, of course, is very important. So all these aspects and more, that's what we call our safety framework. And so we really look into all the aspects with regard to safety framework. And what we then do is also have safety studies to know really the external safety distance. And then really looking, okay, what is then possible in our port with regard to a safety distance. And we do studies for all the fuels coming into our port. And that with the nautical aspects, it's a combination, of course, of with the safety and the nautical aspects. And then we design a bunker map based on all those factors. And then we decide, okay, where can it be done safe and where can it be on a nautical aspect also being done safe? And how is the preparedness with all the aspects I just mentioned?
Okay, great. It's got a big...
Yeah.
And what do you have in Port of Rotterdam in terms of terminal? Do you have, like, for example, hydrogen terminal, LNG, this kind of specific terminal, or not yet?
LNG is, what I explained also in the beginning. We are already covering that for quite some years. So we do have the experience. Also, terminal readiness is there. Of course, not for every terminal yet, but also then it's being discussed if you would like to have a bunker in front of a terminal. It needs to be looked not only from our side, of course, but also from the bunker vessels, the receiving and the supplying vessel. What needs to be taken into account with regard to the preparedness of a terminal. So that's for the LNG. Methanol is in very good progress, I would say. And the hydrogen and also, for example, the ammonia, that's really to be looked into how to be prepared.
Okay, quite interesting, yes, because, yes, Port of Rotterdam, I think in terms of influence in Europe, you are quite big, so if you are the first one to implement this kind of terminal, it can show nice example to other ports, because of course to implement all these bunkering methods, infrastructure, it's a huge work on it. It won't be done in 1 year.
No, absolutely not. No, it really with all our complete list of what to look into from a safety framework, but also it's more than that, of course. Maybe it was not really the question, but maybe also to explain is what we have designed internationally together with other ports. Is that we, of course, we want to also have it harmonized, and so what we did together with ports is really looking into a system, how to look at a new alternative fuel with regard to the possibilities in your specific port. So what we designed is the so-called port readiness levels, and people probably will know the technical readiness levels. So we took that as an example to be used also for the port readiness levels. And what we did is having the 9 levels, and starting with the research 3 levels, then the development levels and the deployment levels. And every level has its own aspects to be looked into. And starting from, for example, also the governmental aspects, market aspects, of course the safety aspects, but also the infrastructure. So it's really from those 4 categories, looking level by level, what needs to be done. For example, stakeholder engagement, because also that is ready. It's not only up to a port. No, absolutely not. Regulatory aspects. So everything in those 4 categories, domains, as we call it, being to be looked into, and then say, okay, where are we? And where are we ready now, really for the acceptance of a new fuel? And for example, if you are at say 5, 6, then we also look into piloting. So a first pilot with regard to a new fuel, and then really from project-based we go to system-based.
Okay,
so,
and you have like one alternative. You are quite, can I say, close to the goal? I would say like quite ready to implement.
Well, LNG, absolutely. But also there to be said, what we have for alternative fuels is if a new bunker, let's say a fuel supplier with the bunkering vessel is coming to the port, or maybe not coming to the port, but has its new alternative fuel, and that could also still be LNG, they need a license.
Okay.
And so even if we say we are already in level 9, even then, of course, every new operator needs to come to us and to go for a license. And then we have a complete auditing system.
Okay.
Administrative audit, vessel audit, and also a reality check audit to really look into is the vessel really prepared, and is the organization prepared, maybe even more important from the bunker management. Is everything prepared to really do a good and safe operation in our port? Okay. So even if you're a 9, or still, even if you're a 9, you really have to look into all those steps. For methanol, we're coming from approximately the 7, level 7, so also there.
But still some...
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, quite interesting. On the in terms of logistics, because bunkering, I imagine, of course, it's at the port, but you need to bring all this fuel. You have pipeline, you have many ways to do it. What kind of challenges we have regarding logistics for LNG, for example?
For energy, we are in a lucky position that we have the LNG terminal in our port. So, that's a very good position from a Dutch perspective, I would say. Also, of course, a Port of Rotterdam perspective. If you look at the other fuels, yes, it's really questions now how to have the logistics in place. For example, biomethanol, but I already mentioned is the availability. But also the hydrogen. I think most people who are a little bit looking into the hydrogen, and especially the green hydrogen, of course, it's going to be produced from sun energy or wind energy. And we do have some possibilities, of course, in the Netherlands, but it's also needed to look abroad. And then you have the question how to have that in the Netherlands. And of course, that could be as a hydrogen, but also there the question came in place is do you have hydrogen carriers? Now, for example, then the ammonia came on the agenda. So yes, logistics is very important as well.
Okay, it's quite interesting because of course you have so many parameters to take into account.
Yep.
But in terms of infrastructure, you already told us a little bit about it. But what kind of let's maybe talk about the collaboration. Because you need to build all of this on, I think you need so many different stakeholders.
Absolutely.
How are you managing all this collaboration with stakeholders?
Well, you have different kinds of stakeholders, of course. If you look at the Port of Rotterdam, we have the community of the port, we have the community of Rotterdam, and yes, of course, we talk with all stakeholders related to the work we are doing. And that could, for example, as we have in the Netherlands, the Omgevingsdienst, DCMR, but also the safety regions, very important, of course, Rotterdam itself, the city of Rotterdam itself, but also the province of South Holland. So all these are important stakeholders. That's with regard to the Netherlands, I would say. But then also we talk a lot with the new developments, so the market players, to also know and to be interested in how do they see the developments, and how what kind of fuels also do they consider with regard to their specific ships. What I already mentioned is also looking from vessel to vessel, depending on how you use it, and on what kind of routes you use it. So we really looking into that and have good international-based discussions as well. We are involved in all kinds of international studies, very important as well, of course, and work together then also with the international players. And very important to say is there are really some international organizations, associations, port-based, from a port aspect, I would say. So it's the International Association for the Ports and Harbors, to be mentioning one, but also, for example, we have the Whoopie Cap, as we call it, the World Climate Action Plan of Ports and Harbors, for ports, and that's really a working together with other ports. And for example, I already mentioned the auditing. The auditing, how to do that, that's being developed on an international level together with other ports. So we work together in that, so that every port international is able to use the same system for the licensing. And maybe to do their audits, better to be said. Is the management in place, the bunker management? Is everything safe? Is the vessel preparedness in place, etc.? So there we work together, but also we develop guidances. For example, the terminal readiness as guidances. Also, we prepare bunker checklists, looking into all the alternative fuels and having bunker checklist by the alternative fuel. So we have the LNG, of course. Now looking into the methanol, the ammonia, etc. So also there the preparedness. So that's work being done together internationally, and also, for example, studies is how to have a good bunker guidances in place. For example, also there the SGMF is also a very important association. But you have a lot more.
You have a lot, yeah. I can
So we are involved in all those developments and organizations, and really working together to have as much as possible harmonized, standardized, but also important to work together. But if you specifically look at the safety, it's of course very important that it is aligned.
Okay, and it's very interesting what you said about collaboration between ports. Can you maybe elaborate about it? For example, if you collaborate with, I don't know, with the port of Singapore to develop this hydrogen terminal, I don't know, is it something quite big in the picture? I mean, this collaboration between ports, or it's not so common?
It is. No, it is absolutely. No, it's. I would say if I look at my agenda, every week I have contacts with regard to international developments with ports, from these associations or initiatives. And really looking into it together is how should it be done, like, for example, what I mentioned, the guidances, the checklists, the tools, and that's really a working together with other ports.
Okay,
yeah.
Quite interesting. Let's talk a little bit about demand and forecast. What can you say about the demand? What is the criteria, I can say, on factors regarding the demand, the future demand of alternative fuels? For example, is it like the ship owners, like we have the fleet of vessel, or this is more like the regulations, more the municipality, the country?
And then really the demand for the fuels.
For the fuel, yes.
For the fuels. I find it, it's of course a market demand. And of course we look into that. And we also talk, of course, with stakeholders, but it's really the development with regard to also, as I just been mentioned, us how do the vessel operators see a demand from their specific choices they make with regard to the fuels, and that's of course a combination in that. And I just mentioned, if you talk about biomethanol, it's in development ongoing. The hydrogen, I mentioned also the energy density. You really have to look into how are you going to use your vessel, and what kind of demand will then be there where.
Okay, interesting. So I think we are quite good on the topic of alternative fuels. Of course, I want to talk about other alternatives, because it's not only about fuels. We have carbon capture, energy capture. Can you elaborate about it? It's quite interesting.
Yep, we think it's very interesting as well.
Yeah.
Of course, the alternative fuels are on its way, and it is a development, and all kinds of targets also from regulatory aspect, but also from the development by the companies themselves also to look into the alternative fuels. But we already have a lot of vessels there, of course. Yep. So it's also being looked into, for example, the retrofitting towards the new alternative fuels. But also, I think my personal preference is to describe it also as a kind of interim solution, the carbon capture on board. And maybe even in combination with alternative fuels like the LNG. Yeah, so that it's not even if you look, absolutely. And I think it's absolutely something to look into, because it's a kind of interim step towards a zero emission. Okay. And we see also the developments also from the markets looking into those kinds of possibilities, and I think the onboard carbon capture is absolutely something to look into. Has its challenges as well, of course, because also there you need the infrastructure. Also there you need to be aware of what kind of safety aspects are there, because it's also an offloading aspect that needs to be in place. But
can you explain maybe for maybe listeners? I mean, they don't. Everyone is maybe don't know what is a carbon capture. And technically, what is it?
Okay, I try to explain it as easy as possible. Is already now we have scrubbers in place at the vessels, for example, for the NOxes and the SOxes, CO2 and NO2, for example. But also you can have a scrubber for the CO2, and the CO2 is being captured via a scrubber, specific scrubber, and then it can be done, for example, by a specific, how to say it?
Like it's infrastructure. Like
Well, for example, you have the all kind of, you have specific kind of substances. I don't prefer to call just one, because there are different kinds of that can make you can use for to taking out the CO2 and to have it as a blend then together, and then to store that on board, and then you could split it on board as well, so you can use that substance for the scrubbing again, and then you have the liquid CO2. Maybe it's being talked about the liquid CO2, or it can also be done offshore, of course. But there are more systems in place to really scrub the CO2 from a technical point of view and store it on board. But then you have the liquid CO2, and that needs to be offloaded somewhere in a port, of course. And there you need the infrastructure and the safety aspects again in place.
Okay, quite interesting. Yeah. And you told us a little bit about some project you are working with this carbon capture. And is it offshore, most of this infrastructure, or you can do it, at the port directly, or to capture this carbon?
Well, the capturing is, of course, during sailing.
Okay. Or you can implement it on board. I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. It's for your question. No, it's really if you sail, the system is there.
Okay.
And it's you have your emissions, and with those emissions you have the scrubbing, and during the sailing, you really take off the CO2 while you from the emissions you have on board. And you store it immediately on board. So then you have a certain amount of CO2 when you come into a port.
Okay, interesting. I thought because I took some research on.
No, it's really the technology is there to do the scrubbing while sailing, and then of course you have the CO2.
But why not everyone is doing this? I mean, there is some challenges.
But there are some challenges.
Of course, again, you need the technology. You need some space on board. Also, it's taking a little bit more. I don't know if it's a little bit, but it needs more energy. So you do have certain aspects to take into account, and then again you need the infrastructure with regard to the offloading, and how to treat it afterwards. And it can be treated, for example, it can be used for utilization. That's a possibility. For example, also it's being used in greenhouses. And also we have the CO2 storage. And you have, for example, the Portos. I don't know if you are aware of it, but the Portos is a place at the North Sea. It's a depleted gas field, as far as I know. And it's been now looked into, and it's under design to have storage in depleted gas fields. And there are more developments. For example, an Aramis project is also there for the Netherlands being looked into. So that could also be an option to have the CO2 offloading, storage, and making sure that it's going to be stored at a good place, so that the CO2 is really being stored. And of course, also then again, it is an interim possibility, because of course, at a certain moment, we would like to strive towards really the zero emissions.
Okay, interesting. Quite a good topic you bring on to the table, because I didn't see a lot of resources about carbon capture. It's quite a new topic. Do you need provide training, or do you see the future about train people to use?
Training is absolutely important, and the human factor is always very important because it's new. I explained also, for example, if you have a container vessel, that's known. But now also you have the fact that you have container vessels propelled by, for example, the LNG. You talk about what is it, the minus 162. You have at a certain moment you can have the ammonia, has its own aspects as we already discussed. So it needs something else also with regard to the training, the competences of the seafarers. Okay. And that is very, very important, of course, to have them well educated. Also, not only with regard to the knowledge of a fuel, but also how to prepare, for example, if you have a bunkering, what needs to be done with regard to SIMOPS, simultaneous operations, for example, because it is another kind of fuel than we were used to have. And also there you need the knowledge, and of course also in combination with regard to what can and cannot be done from safety aspects. And so a lot of other knowledge, I would say, competences need to be in place.
Okay. Interesting. I want to ask you a last question.
Okay.
What kind of advices, or just if you want to say something, for a young generation, you want to say, maybe to guide them to start a career in energy transition in the maritime industry, for example?
I would say do it, because absolutely it's very interesting. Maybe to say I stepped into the hydrogen with regard to as kind of what is hydrogen going to take a role with regard to the energy transition, and what kind of role will it then be, and what do we already know and what do we do not know yet. I stepped in 2013, 2014, and I must say from that moment on I've been involved in all kinds of aspects of the energy transition, and I only can say it's very interesting. It has a lot of interesting questions, challenges, complexity, but if we together all strive towards a zero emission world, I would almost say, and now, okay, keep it a little bit smaller, the shipping, I think it's an absolutely interesting world. And of course, working in the port is very interesting as well, and I would say it's giving a lot of challenges, but on the other hand, therefore it's giving a lot of energy, positive energy to be used for the energy transition.
Great. Thank you, Françoise. Thank you for this great interview. Of course, I'm quite excited to see the future. Regarding energy transition, but with the Port of Rotterdam, what you are doing in the future. So, thank you for this interview, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening and watching this episode. We are looking forward to bring you more insights from maritime professionals, experts, and students. Do not hesitate to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Your support means a lot to us and helps us to bring you more content.